Alex, face down, like a piece of discarded trash, blood pooling on the ground.
If you have evidence, why haven't you gone to Billings? And why are you here asking me not to go back to the job?
Because Billings is an obnoxious prick who has his head so far up his ass he can smell last week's dinner, Mick growled. I went to him when I uncovered information on the guy who was there. Samuels. Eric Samuels.
You know his name?
Gray broke in. Mick held up his hand.
Let me finish. I know a lot more than the asshole's name.
Gray nodded and tried to relax in his seat. He glanced at his watch. He was going to be late.
I went to Billings. Told him everything I knew. He blew me off. Told me I was a washed-up has-been who needed to leave the police work to the professionals. Told me when he needed my help, he damn well asked for it. It's going around the department that Alex was at fault in the shooting. What? What the fuck? I've been hearing rumors, Gray. Seems that the prevailing belief is that Alex acted without cause, and that his death was an unfortunate consequence of his actions. The words blatant disregard of duty were thrown around more than one conversation.
Gray stared at Mick in disbelief.
You can't be serious. I was there. I gave my report. You'd say anything to cover for your partner.
Gray curled his lip in a snarl. Mick held up his hand.
That's what they'll say, not me.
Gray leaned back, taking deep breaths to calm the rage boiling inside him. He took a long, hard look at Mick. Was he jacking with him? Trying to get him pissed off enough that he'd agreed to whatever Mick wanted? He'd never known Mick to be anything but straight up, but losing his son had a way of bending one's conscience. Mick propped his elbows on the table and leaned across, staring intently into Gray's eyes.
You go to your evaluation, son. You talk to Billings. If you think I'm full of shit after you've been back at headquarters for a few hours, then by all means, you go back to the job and forget we ever had this conversation. But if you find out I'm right, you give me a call this afternoon. I'll come over, and we can talk about how we're going to nail the son of a bitch who killed my son, your partner, your brother.
Mick slid out of the booth and threw a few wadded-up bills on the table before stalking toward the exit. It had been hard to calmly request a leave of absence when what he wanted to do was put his fist through the wall. Gray had considered tanking the psych evaluation, but that shit went on his personnel record forever, and he didn't want that to follow him for the next 20 years. He stood in the living room of his apartment, pacing, too agitated to sit down and wait for Mick to arrive. The old man hadn't sounded the least bit surprised when Gray had called him. Didn't even ask what the word around headquarters was. But then he knew. He'd told Gray, but Gray hadn't believed him. Gray had gone back fully intending to ignore Mick's request. No matter what, Gray wanted to be here when he could help with the investigation, not on some wild goose chase. But Billings had drawn a hard line in the sand. Gray wasn't allowed anywhere near the investigation. Too close and all that bullshit. Like he needed a bunch of psychobabble when his partner's killer was on the loose. When he point-blank asked about the rumors floating around about Alex being at fault, Billings had flatly denied it, saying the investigation was ongoing and that the department would do everything in its power to bring the murderer to justice. Gray had also asked about Samuels and his possible connection to the murder, but Billings had refused to comment. He left the office frustrated, only to be met with many sympathetic stares from fellow cops. Many murmured their opinion that no way had Alex done anything wrong. But the fact that they had to say it pissed Gray off to no end. There should be no question. It had raised questions in his mind about the direction the investigation was going. Mick walked in the door, not bothering to knock. Gray met his gaze and found raw determination simmering there.
So now you know,
Mick said quietly.
Are you going to help me?
I arranged for a 6-month leave,
Gray said shortly.
Now tell me everything you found out so we can nail this bastard.
Mick walked over to the couch and sank down on the cushion. He eyed Gray purposefully.
I need you to go to Houston.
What's in Houston?
Faith Malone.
Gray folded his arms over his chest.
What does she have to do with Eric Samuels?
Maybe nothing. She's the only lead I've got right now.
So what about her? Who is she?
Mick scratched at the back of his neck, then shifted his head.
Eric Samuels hooked up with her mother right about the time of the shooting. They both disappeared just a few days after Alex got shot.